Have you ever wondered what the loudest sound in human history was? Maybe you're thinking of a deafening rock concert, the roar of a plane taking off, or even a violent storm. But what you're about to discover goes way beyond all that. Think for a moment about the loudest sound you've ever heard in your life. If you're hearing me now after having experienced something like that, then that sound probably wasn't even close to the loudest ever recorded. Throughout history, there have been moments when humans heard sounds so loud they could be heard thousands of kilometers from their source. But before explaining what the loudest sound was and just how incredible it is, I first need to explain how sound is measured in terms of volume. This image here is a sound wave. For the purposes of this video, all you really need to understand is about the amplitude of the wave, because it's the amplitude that determines how loud a sound appears to us. The decibel scale is used to measure the intensity of sound, and it's important to note that this scale is logarithmic. This means that 10 decibels, dB, is 10 times more powerful than 0 dB, and 20 dB is 10 times more powerful than 10 decibels, but 100 times more powerful than 0 decibels. With that in mind, let's start climbing the scale all the way up to the loudest sound in history, starting at 10 decibels, which is approximately the volume of normal human breathing, barely audible to the average person. 10 times more powerful at 20 decibels is the sound of leaves rustling in the wind, and then 10 times louder than that at 30 decibels is the sound of a whisper. We're still in pretty quiet territory, so going a bit higher, at 40 decibels, we get to the average ambient noise in a library. A little louder, at 50 decibels, is the sound of a normal conversation at home, and 10 times more powerful, at 60 decibels, is the sound of a conversation in a restaurant. At 70 decibels, you have the noise made by a vacuum cleaner, and that's a good comparison for the next few noises we'll discuss. Twice as loud, at 80 decibels, is the sound made by a garbage disposal, and 4 times louder than the vacuum cleaner, at 90 decibels, is the sound you'd hear from a motorcycle engine 25 feet away. At 100 decibels, 8 times louder than a vacuum cleaner, you're in the territory of a jackhammer. Twice as loud as that, at 110 decibels, is the threshold at which most humans begin to feel pain, and somewhere between 108 and 114 decibels is the average sound level at a rock concert. A chainsaw produces a sound of 120 decibels, which is 32 times louder than a vacuum cleaner. A shotgun blast right next to you hits around 130 decibels, and the loudest sound you'll probably ever hear in your life is a commercial jet taking off about 25 meters away, which clocks in at around 150 decibels. This is also the level of sound that can rupture your eardrums instantly if you're exposed to it. However, all of these sounds are insignificant compared to the loudest one ever recorded in history. In 1883, in the Krakatoa archipelago in Indonesia, intense seismic events occurred. Even before the massive eruption of 1883, earthquakes were felt as far away as Australia. On August 25, 1883, Krakatoa entered continuous activity, with explosions being heard every 10 minutes. Sailors up to 20 kilometers away reported pumice stones falling on their ships, some as large as 10 centimeters in diameter. But the loudest sound ever heard by humans, the one we've been leading up to, was far beyond even that. In the spring of 1883, the volcanic island of Krakatoa, in present-day Indonesia, exploded with the force of 200 megatons, obliterating the entire island. Any sound above 194 decibels distorts into more of a shock wave than an actual sound wave, but the eruption of Krakatoa generated an estimated 310 decibels at the epicenter of the explosion. This was so loud that sailors 64 kilometers away had their eardrums ruptured. The sound was even louder than it might seem at first, because a pressure gauge 161 kilometers away measured it at 180 decibels. The sound would have taken about 7 minutes and 53 seconds to travel that far from the volcano, and it would have been enough not only to rupture your eardrums if you had been there, but also to take your breath away and shatter the windows of buildings. It's possible that the sound waves impacting and passing through your body could have even killed you, but if not, you would almost certainly have been permanently deaf for the rest of your life. If the explosion had happened in Central Park, New York, everyone within that radius would have been killed or permanently deafened. In reality, the volcanic explosion was heard as far away as Perth, Australia, where residents reported hearing what sounded like gunfire. It was also heard on the island of Rodrigues in the Indian Ocean, 4,800 kilometers away, where people thought they were hearing cannon fire. Imagine being in Central Park, hearing what sounds like cannon fire around you, only to later find out that the sound came from Ireland and took nearly 4 hours to reach your ears. The sound wave became less audible to humans as it traveled further, eventually dropping to a frequency too low for us to hear. Even though humans couldn't hear the waves beyond a certain point, our instruments detected that the sound waves generated by the explosion circled the planet 3.5 times. The effects of the eruption were felt globally. In the following year, temperatures in the northern hemisphere's summer dropped by about 1.2 degrees Celsius due to volcanic ash in the atmosphere. Between July 1883 and June 1884, distant cities like Los Angeles and San Diego in the United States recorded record amounts of rainfall, a direct consequence of the Krakatoa eruption. Another impact was the increase in sulfuric acid in the upper global atmosphere, which reflected more sunlight back into space and cooled the planet. Skies around the world darkened due to volcanic ash, which blocked red light in the atmosphere, causing the moon to appear green and the sun to create red sunsets. In 2004, a team of astronomers suggested that the red sky in Munch's painting, The Scream, was the result of the volcanic ash from Krakatoa. However, art historians dispute this theory, arguing that Munch was an impressionist and didn't necessarily paint realistic scenes. The idea that a distant volcanic eruption might have inspired one of the most famous paintings in history is fascinating. So, next time you crank up your speakers a bit too loud, at least it won't be loud enough to cause a global catastrophe.